Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Tempty. On the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today, we have Rob Shaw joining us. Rob is the co-founder and director at MetaTeam Limited, organizational performance and team assessment business based in London. So our focus today is going to be on, well, you guessed it, the performance of teams. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Hi, Andy. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Really looking forward to the next hour together.
Yeah, and in full disclosure, Rob and I have kind of worked around each other for probably at least the last 8 years, probably, and our mutual acquaintance, Andy Perkins, kind of put us together. So thank you to Andy Perkins there. Rob, before we get started, we ask all our guests this question. Please tell our listeners your story.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So hi, I'm Rob, 53. Said I live in London. I'm the sort of co-founder of MetaTeam, and in essence, this is for the last 12 years, I've been working with teams around the world to try and develop an approach which is high impact, easy to absorb, maximizes the potential out of the people who are sitting in the team, and really create stickiness for teams, for people within teams. So I've been experimenting, failing fast, learning fast, refining our approach over the last 12 years. Just to bring you up to date about where we are. So looking forward to do that. Prior to my work with teams, I've worked in the space of leadership, coaching, organization development, org design for another 20 plus years, with a blend of in-house in sort of senior sort of corporate positions, consulting with Accenture, and running back. And I originally was a mathematics student, so I'm a confession to make. I'm definitely a bit of a data geek, and the last 30 years of work, that's been kind of rounded out with a real passion for behavioral science. That's in essence what I try and bring to the table.
Well, you and I definitely share a love for mathematics. That is awesome. Rob, if you had to pick one event in your life that just put rocket boosters under your career, that transformational event, what would that be?
Yeah, so I was head of leadership coaching and assessment at BT PLC, which is a UK-centered business. It was about 120,000. And it was going through a major strategic pivot from traditional telecommunications business into broadband, into TV, into quad play. And so therefore there was this identified need to really shift leadership culture, leadership thinking, leadership acting. And so that was the context. And we ran a leadership program. The pivotal moment in that for me was we were delivering our program to the top 50 leaders, the top 500 leaders, using lots of expensive external coaches, in essence, who were propping up our internal capability. And we were asked to scale this program, which is about leading self, leading teams, and leading the organization. We were asked to scale this to the next 3,000 leaders across the business. And obviously the economics just didn't work. So I put together a proposal to say, hey, why don't we bring that coaching and consulting in-house? So I worked with a third party to identify, train, accredit 100 internal coaches who we used to displace the consultant fees that we were charging. And it was just the power of these people working with leaders, working with teams, the growth they came through, the quality of the leadership program they delivered. So interestingly, the sort of happy sheets from the participants went up significantly when we were delivering it in-house. And so it just built this community who are passionate about doing the work, about helping leaders and teams accelerate growth. And it saved it reduced the bill, the cost per participant by about 3x, and the performance went up. And so that for me was really pivotal about actually that's the world I want to be in. That's the nature of the work I want to do. And that was really the launch pad for say, how do I kind of start to think about doing something different?
And did Meta Team then form in your mind out of that experience?
Absolutely. As part of the leadership program, it was the 3 parts: leading self, leading team, leading the organizational system. The real freshness and the wow factor from the participants was about leading teams, and so we generated diagnostic insight about actually just revealing blind spots in a way that was new, insightful, surprising. So just the reaction to that was incredible. The issue was we didn't have then the follow through. We didn't have the how do you then help teams absorb the changes that you've surfaced and surprised them with through the diagnostic. And so that was the jumping off point to say that the building a coaching community of practitioners who are going to do amazing work and really help teams shift. And that insight, that was the two pieces of, those are the two rocket fuels that really propelled us into where Meta Team is today.
Oh, that's wonderful. So this extended series on the show is all about the balancing acts that leaders play. I want to kick things off today asking you about your most important balancing act. What is that balancing act that you've played that's contributed to your career success?
Really great question about the balancing. I'd say probably the most important is the balance that I feel between creating and responding. So I'm, deeply driven by delivering excellent client needs, responding, responding to team, responding to colleagues, responding to the market. But I'm also really passionate about creating a product, a solution, insight, data, interventions that are really cutting edge and work exceptionally well. And there's, as Meta Team is scaling around the world, we're getting lots and lots of feedback. So the pile of new stuff to create is really increasing, but the pile of stuff to respond to is also increasing. And so how I hold those two, how I balance between those two is, I think, is probably, something that I cherish and relish, but it's really there at the moment about how I balance both of those.
Yeah, the tension that exists between those two things, and you can really tip over into the responding part, and then the creativity really starts to take a back seat. I know I've suffered from that in my career, where I don't feel fulfilled because there's too much responding going on and not enough creativity that's happening. So thank you for that.
No, that's me. I'm interested. Totally. It's easy to fall into too much responding, and I think there's just trying to make sure we create the space for that. It's such an important aspect.
Yes, creating and making the space. I think that's a great message for our listeners. Rob, we're going to talk a lot about team performance assessment tools today. Let's get grounded. Why is team performance, as opposed to individual performance, so important to organizational success?
Yeah. So the team. I go to the data here, Andy, if that's okay. So. We had data from 1,200 teams. So we partnered with McKinsey. We had data from 1,200 teams, and the performance delivered by the teams who were strong against our model was delivered 23% extra performance and productivity compared with the average team. 23%. And when we ran the leadership program at BT that I talked about, the leaders who went on the program versus the leaders who didn't, they got a 6% uplift. So it was almost a 4x increase in the output of the team when you get teams thriving and growing and performing and with the right ways of thinking and acting. So it's just such a magnifier, right? It's such an amplifier. And I feel team performance has such high leverage. So that's fantastic. And there's interestingly, like Daniel Goleman did some research in the HBR on the back of sort of John Odde's action-centered leadership model about leading self, managing relationships, delivering the task. Interestingly, when you get all three of those components really strongly happening by a leader, you get sort of 400%. You get 4x of the performance. But what we found is it's often about managing task, a little bit about managing self. The managing relationships and the dynamics from the team can often get short change and short shrift.
Yeah, I've found in my career that team assessment really does take a back seat to individual assessment. And, there's nothing wrong with the discs of the world and the color wheel, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll add a few more et ceteras onto that because there are so many of them. But I'm really excited about having this conversation today because we are in a results, a performance crisis, really globally in terms of team and productivity and output in business, especially in the United States. So, yeah, if your model and the interventions that follow can lead to a 4x improvement over a baseline, that's really something that all of our listeners should be thinking about. Rob, let's get it before we break for a quick commercial. Let's dive into MetaTeam. Walk us through the MetaTeam assessment model as simply as possible and the inner and outer habits that you focus on.
Yeah. Thanks, Angie. So there are lots of team models out there. So there's Lencioni, etc., versions of Hogan. Our model was developed by what are the best teams doing to deliver the performance they deliver. And we, in essence, found that those teams mastered what we call the inner game, which is kind of similar to Lencioni, but also the outer game. The inner game is, in essence, how do we operate when we're working as a team in a team meeting, in a virtual team meeting, doing work together? Outer game, how are we interfacing with the market, our stakeholders, our competitors, our regulators, etc.? And you have to have both. And obviously, they are all interrelated and interconnected. So mastery of the inner game is important, and it's not sufficient. You have to master the outer game and the inner game. And interestingly, we've got 20,000 responses in our diagnostic. Teams generally are better at the inner game. Teams are generally pretty not so good at the outer game. So there's potential uplift there. But when it clicks, that's when you get huge value. The inner game focuses on the level of trust the team shares, the level of resilience that the team creates together. And our view is resilience is really a team sport. It's the strength of purpose and how that flows through into accountability, as you talked about, that balancing act of trust and accountability. And the last in the game then is about the strength of focus of the team. So much to do, so much complexity, so much accountability, not enough time, sharpness of focus in a game. And then the outer game is, and this once again is like as important, but how adaptable is the team to its environment? Yeah. How good is the team at influencing its stakeholders? We have a factor called agility, a habit called agility, which is really mental agility. How good is the team at seeing the big picture, joining up the dots, spotting the opportunities, figuring out where, creating the new value? So that's a real distinctor. And then lastly, it's about the team's ability to take action, execute at speed.
Oh, well, we've got a lot to talk about after the break. When you were talking about the inner habits and the inner habit of focus, in the thing that immediately came to mind is in my next book, I talk about the shiny ball syndrome and keeping leaders away from flitting from shiny ball to shiny ball and really staying focused. So maybe I'll have some influence over your assessment model in the future. We'll rebrand it as the shiny ball syndrome.
Love it.
Oh, well. All right. Well, we'll break for a very, very quick commercial, and we'll be right back. I'm Andrew Tempte. The alignment of personal purpose with that of the business we lend our talents to is essential to achieving optimal work-life balance. But do you know what your personal purpose is? To help answer this crucial question, I've created a guidebook to help define your personal purpose and a vision statement to serve as your North Star. Visit andrewtempte.com/purpose to download your free copy today. And we're back with Rob Shaw and our discussion on the importance of team health and Rob's meta team assessment. Since this is the Balancing Act podcast, let's talk about the balance among the habits that we were talking about right before the break, the inner habits and the outer habits. If you had to pick the two habits that are most opposed, most at opposition to one another, what are they, and how important is striving for balance between them to team health?
I think it's a fascinating question, Andy. It makes me think about putting my data geek hat on. I'm thinking about the correlation between the different habits and what's strong and what's weak. And actually, the weakest correlation between those habits is adapting and resilience. So those two habits are the least correlated in the model. You're looking at the 20,000 responses that we've got from teams around the world. And so resilience is about drive, will, belief, confidence, working through the tough stuff. So it's very, it's kind of the courage and pushing and striving. But actually, the essence of adapting is that reflecting, it is learning, it is discerning. So it's a very different kind of way of operating, way of thinking, way of acting. And so there's a time, and it's a time for both. And I think the teams that are able to get the balance right and strike the time for both, there's huge value by unlocking that balancing act. So that dimension, I think, is really stood out for me. And if I were to say to teams, almost like, what's one of the golden rules for just taking your performance to the next level, it will be manage those two, because they're different ways of being and acting and showing up. And create the time and the space for both.
Yeah, on the surface, it seems that the correlation would be much higher. That if you were highly resilient, that you would be highly adaptable. In both as an individual and most importantly as a team. But your data is showing otherwise, and from your response, I can see how team resilience might almost flop over into kind of this fixed mindset of just kind of plowing through the circumstances and not being agile and adaptable. So it's making some sense to me. Can we dive in a little deeper there?
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, right? This is about one strength being overplayed.
Yeah.
And if you look at just the level of volatility, uncertainty post-COVID, resilience has had to be dialed up in teams, and it's typically the high scoring, right? And I think it kind of falls over and actually just doesn't create the time or space for teams to focus in on how they adapt to the environment. And actually, the resilience is great for the short term, absolutely essential and fundamental for successful teams. But the medium term and the long term really comes from adapting. And so the mission is long term sustainable growth, right, and performance for teams. And I think that overplaying of resilience, given and the environmental factors have been driving that, and I see that in a lot of leaders, and teams we work with I think has got a bit in the way of actually just trying to balance that out in a more nuanced way.
Yeah. So you mentioned the pandemic. Before the show, we were talking a little bit about pre and post pandemic differences in teams. Which habits, inner or outer, took a hit during the pandemic? I mean, either they degraded, and which habits showed improvement, both, comparing pre and post pandemic?
Yeah, great. This fascinated me. So we've got about 10,000 responses either side of the pandemic. So we said, what's the same and what's different? So we just completed the analysis recently. I think positively, purpose has gone up. Purpose has nudged upwards. So people are feeling more purposeful about the teams they're in terms of why they come to work, what the mission is. How they support each other to get there, how they kind of relate their day-to-day work to their purpose. So purpose has strengthened post the pandemic. I think, just sort of time and reflection and virtual working, it's given people more time to reflect on, why am I doing this and why is this important for me? So I think that's definitely something to hold on to. The opposite, the downside, is trust has taken a real hit, right? So trust is down 10% pre and post, which is, really, I think, a really significant hit for teams. So teams are struggling to share a spirit of togetherness because of the ways of working, virtual working, hybrid working. The consequence of that, they're not leveraging the differences sufficiently well of each other, and therefore there's less creativity. And the worst sort of micro habit, which is affected, is they're not having the tough conversations that they really need to. In order to resolve, agree a position, move forward, and make progress. So, you talked about the sort of existential performance challenge. For me, a lot of that comes from actually teams have to get stronger at building trust, having the tough conversations, leveraging the differences. And that's a lot of the work we're doing, post-COVID with teams, is about how do you start to build those practices when you're working in a hybrid way or a fully virtual way. So that's key. So I think those two would be the real standouts for me, and that is materially influencing the nature of the work we're doing, post COVID with teams around the world.
Well, I'm heartened that purpose has increased because in the Balanced Business, which comes out in September of this year, everything starts with purpose. So I am really heartened to hear that there's seems to be data that's showing better alignment of purpose within the team, and that means that folks are aligning their personal purpose with that of the business. And that's a real positive, but on the very troubling on the trust side of things. So, we've got a lot of work ahead of us to balance trust and accountability, which is good news for our respective businesses, but bad news for teams. Yeah. Now let's get to that hybrid and remote work comment that you were talking about before. One of your key hypotheses is that hybrid and remote work are damaging both trust and resilience. In a world where hybrid and remote work are here to stay in many businesses, what do you recommend for leaders to improve those habits within teams that, everybody's just can't or won't be co-located?
Yeah, I think it's a great challenge, Andy, and I'd say we're experimenting right now. So we're absolutely experimenting in this space. But the experiments you have to make it a habit, right? So you have to make the connection, the building trust, a habit, right? And it starts small. I think the key point for me is, so pointed out, having some data that says we've got a problem here really helps enrollment of the team to do the work. But then we kind of shrink the change into these small bite-sized nudges with choices for teams about, are we going to engage in feeling more together? Are we going to engage in appreciating the different perspectives and integrating that into a consensus way forward. Are we going to have, put the very difficult conversations and be courageous in a virtual structure? And I think it's so we help teams do that, small nudges, practice, experiment in a virtual way. And it's harder, right? It is just tougher virtually when you can't have the body language and all the cues and the tone. It just becomes more difficult. But so you just need to, it's a new muscle that we feel teams need to build. But we're very much, you make a big change by lots of small changes. So right. Small changes repeated over time, in essence, is how we're going about, rebuilding trust. And resilience then comes, right? Resilience often comes along with a ride if you start to really build the trust.
So, little side question here. Where does transparency fit in all of this? So you're the leader of a team. You want to improve the health of the team, but you have this balancing act to play in terms of how transparent you are of the good, bad, and the ugly across team members. Where does transparency fit in the inner and outer habits?
Yeah, I think it's we're a sort of rip the Band-Aid off type of thing, Andy. We find the diagnostic really shows the differences, the spread, the range, the different perceptions about what it feels like working in this team. And our hypothesis and belief is the stronger the surprise about which is real about my data, and people don't generally argue with my own data, the more enrolled they are in doing something about it. So we really lean into high transparency from the get-go. So it's anonymous, but the differences and the ranges is really the richness of the work that we use. And most teams have a really significant spread. And so using that data as the jumping off point is very powerful. So that's our perspective and point of view on it.
Yeah, I can just imagine that there's a lot of push and pull and tension as you go in and implement your programs to build teams. How much transparency? It's got to be a real balancing act. So, Rob, final question. We're almost out of time. What's next for MetaTeam? What are you most excited about for the future of team assessment and org performance?
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm super excited about just continuing to refine and the science and through the data we're capturing, and that's around. We have a construct called team archetypes, so team types, which really drives our team development journeys. So you can have immediate impact. So refining that is super exciting. I'm really excited about integrating the team data into psychometric data and into engagement and culture data at a system level. I don't know what that's going to show us, but I'm super excited. I think we're going to have some profound hypotheses and insights that are going to come as we start to kind of aggregate that big data, start to see what it's showing for us, and start to say, does that start to influence how we would intervene? So I'm super excited about that. And the mission is, how do we help teams thrive and grow in this post-COVID hybrid virtual working environment? And so I think that's the mission. And so therefore, in pursuit of that, in service of that, just refining what we do, experimenting, hopefully failing, not so much, learning fast and improving our offering.
Well, as we wrap up, I just want to make sure that our listeners can find you because there is a bit of a collision between this really, really big company called Meta and MetaTeam. When you search, how can our listeners find you?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So yeah, interesting. MetaTeam was inaugurated a couple of years before Meta came to life. So, but you can find us at www.metateam.co.uk. That's our website. Or you look at Rob Shaw at MetaTeam on LinkedIn, and that's the best way to contact us.
Yeah, and this is a truly global business. This is not specific to the United Kingdom. Meta Team has implementations all over the world. Rob, I really appreciated your time. Very illuminating discussion today. I'm sure we added a lot of value to the business community today. I wish you all the success in the world. I look forward to working with you in the future. My name is Andy Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major podcast streaming services. Please like, subscribe, rate, and definitely share the show in your networks. And we will see you next time.